The most terrifying place on Earth isn't a haunted house or a dark alley. It's a cramped, government-issued cabin sitting on the edge of absolute nothingness, where the nearest human being is a 3-day walk away, and the radio only works when the weather gods feel merciful. Remote research stations are built for science, but the people sent to staff them quickly discover that the wilderness has a way of swallowing logic whole. From the frozen silence of the Canadian Yukon, where the northern lights paint the sky in ghostly greens, to the scorching red deserts of the Australian outback, to the storm-lashed, bird-haunted islets off the coast of Scotland, these outposts become prisons of the mind when the sun goes down. The 3 true horror stories you're about to hear tonight come from real field researchers, geologists, climatologists, who walked into their assignments as hard-nosed skeptics and left as believers in something much darker than data sheets can measure. They recorded their experiences not for fame, but because some truths are too heavy to carry alone. If you crave the kind of real fear that settles into your bones and makes you double-check the locks on your own doors, you're in the right place. Please take a moment right now to like this video, subscribe to our channel, turn on all notifications. Your support is what lets us dig deeper into the hidden nightmares that most people never hear. And after you've listened, tell us in the comments which research station would you have fled first. Now, draw the curtains, silence your phone, and let's descend together into the unknown. Sam Walker had spent 11 months at the Kluin Lake Permafrost Research Station in the Yukon without a single moment of genuine fear. Because genuine fear requires a threat, and the only threats he had encountered: a curious grizzly, a whiteout storm that pinned him indoors for 4 days, a generator that failed at -40 were all things he had trained for. Things that belong to the rational world of satellite phones and contingency protocols. Not the whispering that began on the 3rd of July, when the temperature inexplicably climbed 20 degrees in 2 hours and a low, persistent hum started vibrating up through the cabin floor. At first, he attributed the sound to shifting ice, a geological groan that permafrost specialists write papers about. But the hum had a pattern, a rhythm that ebbed and flowed in ways that felt almost linguistic, as if the frozen ground itself was trying to speak. And on the 5th night, it grew loud enough that the windows of the research station began to vibrate in their frames, producing a harmonic resonance that made his teeth ache. It was during one of those long, sleepless, vibrating nights that Sam noticed the microphone he had left plugged into the outdoor acoustic monitoring rig designed to record the cracks and pops of thawing ice was registering a voice buried deep within the infrasound spectrum. A voice that the software translated into a spectrogram showing clear, deliberate, and repeated patterns that looked nothing like natural noise and everything like the visual fingerprint of a human speaking in slow motion. He ran the audio at 10 times normal speed through the headset, and the sound that emerged was a drawn-out, it's a metallic rendition of his own name, spoken in a cadence that matched the rhythm of the floor vibrations with an accuracy that was statistically impossible. And the moment that realization hit him, the cabin's single overhead bulb flickered once, twice, and then burned out completely, plunging him into a darkness so absolute that he could not see his own hand in front of his face, but could still feel the floor flexing beneath his boots as though something massive had shifted its weight in the frozen earth directly below him. He did not pack his equipment. He did not log out of the data stations. He did not follow any of the evacuation protocols that had been drilled into him during orientation. He simply grabbed the satellite phone, yanked open the heavy steel door, and ran into a night lit only by a crescent moon that seemed to hang far too low and too close, casting his own shadow onto the snow in a shape that looked for the entire 3-mile sprint to the emergency cache. Longer and thinner than any shadow his body had ever cast before. The hum stopped the moment he reached the tree line, and when a helicopter extraction team flew him out 2 days later, they found the permafrost station perfectly intact except for one anomaly that no one in the research division ever officially explained. Every single pane of glass in the observation room had been pressed outward from the inside, as though something within the cabin had tried to escape but failed, leaving behind frost-trimmed handprints that were, according to the incident report, consistent with human morphology, but approximately 30% larger than the average adult male. Danica Morris had spent her entire academic career studying the microbiology of hyperarid desert environments, which is how she found herself alone on the 3rd of July at a tiny climate monitoring outpost in the Simpson Desert of Central Australia. A place so flat and so hot and so utterly devoid of life that the nearest tree was a 40-kilometer drive over sand dunes that sang a low, moaning note when the wind crossed them at just the right angle, a sound the local Ararati elders called Kuranita and warned her not to follow if she heard it at night. The station itself was a prefabricated donga bolted to a concrete slab, surrounded by a razor wire fence designed not to keep anything in but to keep feral camels out. And it was on the second evening of a 3-week data collection rotation that Danica noticed a single set of footprints leading from the eastern horizon straight toward the fence line. Footprints that had not been there when she finished her evening sensor calibration at sunset, and that appeared when she shone her flashlight across the red sand to be perfectly impossibly bare, toe and arch rendered in immaculate detail despite daytime ground temperatures that routinely exceeded 70 degrees Celsius, temperatures that would have seared the skin off any living foot within seconds. The footprints approached the fence, and then they stopped, as though whatever made them had simply vanished at the perimeter. And Danica did the sensible thing that all field scientists do when faced with an unexplainable observation. She photographed it, logged it as an anomaly, and told herself it was probably a boot tread distorted by wind erosion. An explanation that held water for exactly 4 hours until the moon rose and she saw, through the donga's single north-facing window, a figure standing motionless in the exact center of the research plot's solar panel array. A dark silhouette against the silver panels that did not reflect any light and did not appear to have any depth or dimension, as though it were a two-dimensional cutout of a person rather than a person itself. Danica's emergency training had covered dehydration, snakebite, vehicle breakdown, and satellite phone failure, but it had not covered what to do when a flat, featureless, human-shaped absence of light began to glide across the sand toward your shelter without moving its legs or altering its posture. So she did the only thing her terrified brain could compute. She killed every light inside the donga, wedged a chair under the door handle, and pressed herself into the corner farthest from the window, listening for the next 3 hours to the sound of fingernails, or something like fingernails, tracing long, slow, deliberate lines down the corrugated metal walls of the shelter in a circuit that never repeated exactly, but also never strayed more than a hand's breadth from the spot where she crouched and shook. At dawn, when the first brutal knife of sunlight cut across the desert floor and the scratching abruptly ceased, Danica stepped outside to find the razor wire fence completely untouched, but the solar panels covered in a fine red dust that, when she later analyzed a sample with the portable microscope, contained no biological material whatsoever, but did possess a crystalline structure that pulsed with a faint, residual heat signature that refused to dissipate even after being stored for 6 weeks in a refrigerated sample case at Alice Springs, where the head of the department took one look at it, closed the case, and told Danica, in a voice that did not invite questions, "We'll take it from here." Ewan MacLeod was a field ornithologist who had spent so many solitary months on so many uninhabited Scottish islands that he joked his only real colleagues were puffins and gannets, a joke that felt a good deal less funny on the 3rd of July when he found himself marooned by an unseasonable Atlantic gale on a speck of basalt called Gannet Rock. A place so small and so windswept that the research hut clung to the highest point like a limpet, and the only communication with the mainland was a solar-powered VHF radio relay that had been glitchy since the day it was installed in the 1980s. The storm arrived faster than any forecast had predicted, whipping the sea into a fury of white foam and salt spray that obliterated the horizon. Ewan hunkered down with a flask of tea, a notebook full of guillemot breeding data, and the nagging awareness that the relay station's backup battery was reporting a charge level that should have been impossible because the solar panels had been covered in cloud for 3 straight days. Yet, the voltage readout was climbing, not falling, as if something other than sunlight was feeding power into the system. At 2:17 a.m., the VHF radio in the hut crackled to life and broadcast a transmission that Ewan's sleep-deprived brain initially parsed as static. But after 3 repetitions of the same pattern, he realized it was a voice, human voice, reading out a string of numbers in a flat, uninflected monotone that sounded like the automated shipping forecasts he sometimes picked up from the mainland, except that this voice was speaking in a language he did not recognize. Not Gaelic, not English, not any of the Scandinavian tongues that occasionally bounced across the North Sea and, reciting coordinates that he wrote down, with a pencil that kept breaking from the pressure of his trembling hand. When he plotted those coordinates on his maritime chart, the position was not on the island, not in the sea, not anywhere on any map of the Hebrides or the Scottish coast, but precisely inside the rock, directly beneath his feet, at a depth that corresponded to a cave system that, according to every geological survey ever conducted of Gannet Rock, did not exist, but was now apparently the source of a signal that was repeating the same number sequence over and over with the patient, mechanical persistence of a beacon that had been broadcasting for a very long time and had only just been noticed. Ewan spent the remainder of the storm in a state of paralyzed alertness, watching the battery readout climb to 110% of its rated capacity while the radio continued its incantation of coordinates. And when the weather finally cleared and a lobster boat from Barra arrived to retrieve him, he said nothing to the crew about what he had heard, not because he was afraid they wouldn't believe him, but because as they motored away from the rock, he looked back and saw, perfectly clearly in the daylight, a dark opening at the waterline that had not been there when he arrived, an opening that was slowly, very slowly, closing like a mouth sealing itself shut, that he understood in that moment that some signals are not meant to be received and some places are not meant to be studied. A truth he has carried silently for 22 years and only now. With the coordinates locked in a safety deposit box in Inverness and the relay station officially decommissioned and dynamited into rubble, as he decided to share with a world that he prays will never go looking for what lies beneath Gannet Rock. And those were 3 true remote research station horror stories, real accounts from the people who lived them and barely escaped with their sanity intact. If these tales left you feeling exposed and unsettled, you're not alone. That's the power of the unknown, reaching out from the world's most isolated corners and brushing its cold. Fingers against the edge of our comfortable reality. Our team works tirelessly to track down these authentic experiences, verify the details, and bring them to you in a format that does justice to the terror these individuals endured. If you believe these stories deserve to be heard, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It's the single most effective way you can support what we do and ensure we can keep hunting down the hidden horrors no one else will touch. And drop a comment below. Which story would have made you break protocol and run? We read every single response, and your engagement genuinely shapes the content we create next. Stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, the next time you see a tiny dot on a satellite map labeled research station, someone might be in there right now listening to something they can't explain, and wishing desperately they weren't alone.